everyone, this is John. You are watching our weekly show, The Subcontinent. This program is here to address the most pressing issues in the region which hosts almost 25% of the global population. A region which is divided by borders but united by a connected spirit, a common history.
In this edition of The Subcontinent, we shall focus on landlordism and feudalism in Pakistan. Also, we will take a look on how Kashmir has changed from a heaven on earth to what?
You may be surprised to know that landlordism and feudalism still exist in the world. And this is not secretly or occasionally. There are thousands of feudal lords who own thousands of acres of land in different parts of Pakistan. About 65% of Pakistan's total land consists of deserts, mountains, and urban areas. Apparently, a lack of effective land reforms has given rise to landlordism. These landlords often live like tyrants in their own lands, not just beyond the law, but powerful enough to change them.
The feudal system is still the more prevalent practice in many areas in Pakistan. In any agrarian society, agricultural land has always been a potent symbol of power, since possession of land provides pervasive and extensive control over people, especially those who directly depend on it. Pakistan is no exception. According to FAO reports, out of a total area of 79.6 million hectares, 22.1 million hectares are cultivated, and the country's agriculture sector contributes 18.5% of the GDP. Who decides on how to run this huge industry? The landlords, a powerful network of families that has shackled Pakistan's rural poor to landowners, a major obstacle in the way of social mobility in Pakistan. Basically, feudalism means a landlord has all the land while vassal and serfs work on it to get a piece of the profit of the land in return. Feudal lords still make their own set of laws. In reality, feudal landlords build a state within a state where they are king and all the peasants are their subjects.
Feudal system in Pakistan is a legacy inherited from the British colonial system, where a worker known as a vassal had to serve king's land in order to get the piece of land in return. British rulers introduced three land revenue systems: the zamindari system, the rotwari system, and the mahalwari system. Many people have been trying to change this harrowing situation for the poor farmers since the early days of Pakistan, but to no avail. So, what is slowing or stopping the progress then? Who are the major actors and what should they do?
The decadent feudal system is yet another malady from the British imperialism in the subcontinent. At the time of the creation of Pakistan, most of the country had a feudal structure. Although the British feudal system is ended, in most of rural areas, troubles linger in the life of poor people despite all the modifications which ensue from the land reforms of the mid-1950s. The gap is even widening between the have-nots and have-lots. The poor have no access to state resources. Hence, they are heavily dependent on elected representatives and powerful landowners. And they would seem to mediate public access to state resources in ways that remain profoundly disadvantageous for the poor. It appears that no change can reduce economic and political dominance among land-owning kinship factions. They compete in elections for access to state power. The land-owning clans can call on the so-called local vote banks of tenants and servants to support them in their electoral battles. There is no such a thing as feudal loyalty. Most of these people are just in a lot of debt and see no other alternative, as most of major politicians are landlords or feudal-oriented.
To learn more about feudalism in Pakistan, we are now joined by Dr. Taimur Rahman. He's a professor of political economy at Lahore University of Management Sciences, and he's also the author of the book, The Class Structure of Pakistan. Dr. Rahman, welcome to the show. So, why does landlordism still exist in Pakistan?
When Pakistan was created in 1947, it was created by a party called Muslim League, in which the landlords were quite predominant. And they were quite afraid that if the Congress party ever came to power, that there would be widespread land reforms. They would lose their lands. So during the course of Pakistan's last 73 years, there were 3 different attempts to try and undo landlordism in Pakistan. The first one was in 59, the second was in 73, the last one was in 77. But the total land redistributed in all these 3 land reforms is less than 1% of the total agricultural land of Pakistan. Landlords remain very, very powerful and continue to dominate over the political parties of Pakistan even today.
Okay, what is the difference between Indian feudalism and Pakistani feudalism?
India is a very large country and a very diverse country, and there are regions of India that have very many different kinds of social systems. But if we compare the social system of northern India, and specifically of Punjab, which is in India, with the system in Punjab, which is in Pakistan, they are quite similar. The exception, of course, is mainly a religious one, which is that Pakistan is dominated by Islam. And in India, there are many different religions, including Hinduism, also Islam, but many other religions. In eastern Punjab, for example, there is Sikhism. So in purely economic terms, there might not be much of a difference. The difference might be in cultural terms. And also Pakistan tends to be dominated by 2 provinces that have a heavy influence of tribal customs and traditions and economies, that is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. So I think those would be the main differences in diversity, in culture and religious factors, but the differences between the economic factors purely in the abstract may not be very large.
Dr. Rahman, we've collected some global media coverages for you to see. So let's just take a look and then we'll come back to the question answer session.
These feudal lords do not pay any taxes on their large land holding and take a lion's share of all produces in Pakistan, thus inflating the prices of staples such as wheat and rice as well as vegetables. They are out of the tax circle but have created a vicious circle that has no end. Land reforms in Pakistan have a long and somewhat cheered history. The British had less of an interest in the matter as they relied on the support of several influential landlords. Although there had been some limited reforms in the years leading up to 1947, all major reforms date from the years after independence. Why does this huge inequality persist in land ownership? The British ran an extractive state would hardly have an interest in the fair distribution of land. Rather, they reinforced landlords as they relied on their support.
All right, Dr. Rahman, thank you for staying with us and welcome back to the audience as well. So, who or what are the main culprits of landlordism? Who can change the situation and how?
The situation can only be changed by a grassroots movement from the peasants themselves for land reforms. They have to organize and put pressure on the government to give poor people land, to undertake land reforms, to ensure that lands that are not being productively used by landlords are given to poor peasant farmers. We have the example of the MST in Brazil that has put pressure on the government and managed to redistribute land to incredibly poor people. In Pakistan, the government itself, or rather the state, is not interested in land reforms. And political parties such as the Muslim League or the People's Party of Pakistan or the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, all 3 of which are the largest political parties of Pakistan, are dominated by landlords. Political parties need landlords in order to garner or collect votes. Therefore, in my opinion, the only possibility of any real large-scale change in terms of the landed structure of Pakistan can come about once peasants themselves are mobilized and organized and put pressure on the government for land reforms.
All right, what about this brutal landlordism? What can be done about it? Where local police refuse to pursue charges against influential landlording families, even when murder or mayhem or even corruption is clearly proved?
That's right. In many villages across Pakistan, the policeman tends to be under the control of the landlord. And of course, this is a very, very unjust situation for the simple reason that the police needs to be impartial in in order to do its work. So I think for the impartiality of the police, it is very important that large-scale police reforms are undertaken, that police, when they are operating in a region, should not be recruited necessarily, or at least senior officers of the police ought not to be recruited from the local area, because they can more easily come under the influence of local landlords when they are recruited from the local area. And the senior police needs to keep a very strict check and balance to ensure that policemen are regularly rotated in villages, so that the connections that continue to develop after a long period of stay in a local area are severed, where police are moved around. The IG police in particular has to be, that's the Inspector General in particular, has to be extremely vigilant that educated policemen are sent to do their work in local areas. Last but certainly not least, the police infrastructure is relatively strong in urban areas, but it is extremely weak in rural areas. So for example, the number of policemen, the resources at their disposal are in fact very tiny in comparison to the resources available to landlords in villages. And what this means is that the police is really at the mercy of various landlords. It does not really have the power to police village areas without the assistance of the landlord. And so police have to be strengthened institutionally in relation to landlords and made autonomous and independent of any influence of landlords in village areas or in rural areas of Pakistan.
Dr. Rahman, thank you so much for coming to our show. That was very interesting and insightful from your end.
Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Viewers, now let's see how people on social media see this situation, and then we can continue with the rest of the segment.
Tulha Tariq Bhutto believes despite the elimination of feudalism in many countries, it still exists in Pakistan, particularly in Sindh. This one mentions the fact that welfare can't be achieved without abolishing feudalism. This is also a picture of a 20-year-old girl who has become the symbol of fighting feudalism in the country, Rubab. In this tweet by Rubab, she demands justice against the feudal lords and the murderers of her father, grandfather and uncle.
Kashmir is what we call the large valley between the Great Himalayas and the Pir Panjal range that is divided between India, Pakistani and Chinese administered territories. Here's the problem. Kashmiris have their own language, their own culture and their own separate identity. The Indian government refers to the territory under Pakistan's control the Pakistan-held Kashmir, and the government of Pakistan calls the portion of Kashmir administered by India as Indian-occupied Kashmir. And ironically, the native Kashmiris might tend to look at all of them as a misnomer.
Kashmir is at the same time one of the most picturesque places on earth, yet a flashpoint capable of triggering the next world war. There are Indian-administered and Pakistani-administered Kashmir, but none of the two governments are satisfied, and neither are Kashmiris. Jannah, or paradise, is how people in the South Asia used to call Kashmir, since its beauty and cuisine, touched by the warmth and hospitality of its people, was nothing less than heavenly. Once called the paradise of bliss on earth by Mughal Emperor Jahangir, the region is now a sandwich between Pakistan and India, turning it into hell with rising militarization and militancy. The region has seen many ups and downs under numerous leaders in its history, from Hindu-Buddhist ancient era and the dynasty of Shah Mir, its first Muslim ruler, to Mughal or Afghan or Sikh rule. But the quandary we call Kashmir today is another legacy of the British colonialism. Strategically located at the northern tip of the peninsula, Kashmir is a critical landmass for both India and Pakistan. However, over the last 3 decades, there has been an uprising in favor of independence.
While leaving the subcontinent in 1947, the British enabled a division of the country on religious grounds, with the Muslim-dominated regions becoming a part of Pakistan, while others stayed a part of India. But there was a problem. Jammu and Kashmir was ruled by a Hindu Dogra king, while the majority of the population was Muslim. As per the partition formula, it could have gone to Pakistan, but the Hindu king was not ready. Back then, a so-called standstill agreement was signed to continue trade, communication and travel. Ever since, the life there has been everything but still.
The story of historical injustice and violence in Kashmir is a never-ending saga. With extra fuels and flames since the 1980s, the current crisis has claimed thousands of lives and continues to make this territory a hotbed of militancy with no resolution in sight, as neither side is willing to cooperate in a way that benefit the habitants of this vale of tears under the shadows of Himalaya. Kashmir is where three nuclear powers of India, Pakistan and China meet, so the fear of a full-scale war never completely disappears. This has had nothing for Kashmiris but a sense of being lost, dejected, terrified, silenced and hurt. Worst of all, they do not know who to trust. From one side, India uses the so-called armed aggression of Pakistani tribesmen into Kashmir as an excuse to make it a part of India, perhaps with covert support from some of the most powerful states of the world. But the other side says the clandestine dispatch of RSS armed volunteers to Kashmir was to join hands with Dogra forces for ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Muslims.
For more on Kashmir, we have with us Mr. Shahnawaz Ali Rehan. He's a doctoral researcher in modern history at the University of Oxford. Mr. Rehan, welcome to the program. So, Kashmir has been described as the heaven on earth, but seemingly not for the indigenous Kashmiris. Why is that?
It's due to politics. I mean, this famous saying of Jahangir, the 17th century Mughal ruler, that if there is any heaven on earth, it's here, it's here, it's here. So Kashmir, if you visit Kashmir, is truly a heaven on earth. It's so beautiful, mesmerizing, natural beauty, and the people are very cordial, calm, and everything, the Kashmiri people, the natural beauty, everything is mesmerizing back in Kashmir. But the thing is, due to the politics of both the countries, India and Pakistan, Kashmir has become a sandwich kind of a thing which has been, I mean, they have lost their nationhood or statehood recently, and after the withdrawal of the special status under the Article 370 of Indian Constitution, Kashmir has somehow, it's literally become a hell. I mean, people lost their jobs, students are, from last 1 year, there is no classes has been going on in the schools. I mean, the infrastructure of the hospital is really pathetic right now during this coronavirus lockdown. So, I mean, a large scale of militarization process was going on in Kashmir since 1989. And, the Indian Home Ministry, the way it's treating Kashmir, they always consider Kashmir as an integral part of India. The way it's behaving, it looks like the Indian Home Ministry, which is headed by Mr. Amit Shah, that as if he himself is the plaintiff, he himself is the judge, he himself is the executioner, he himself is the jury, and this is why the Kashmiri people are suffering. And Kashmir, which was once a heaven on earth, has recently become a hell.
Do you think the Kashmir debacle has anything to do with the partition plan of 1947?
Of course, I mean, there has been much controversy over the way India was divided up back in 1947, and the plan for the partition was very hasty actually, and the borders of the new nation has been drawn off in around 6 weeks. So you can imagine how hasty the process was.
Mr. Rehan, before moving ahead and asking new questions, let's see how media sees this situation, and then we can come back.
اگر فردوس بر روی زمین است همین است و همین است و همین است. If there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. Proposed amidst lockdown, the new domicile law denies people's efforts for rights, recognition and justice its true place in history. Meanwhile, recent reports on the issuance of domicile certificates to over 25,000 individuals, non-locals, that would allow the entry of non-residents into the state have further precipitated chaos in the region. It all began when Kashmir was still a tourist paradise. In 1984, when Indira Gandhi was in power, the founder of the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front JKLF, Muhammad Maqbul Bhatt of Tregram in Kupwara, was hanged to death. He had been convicted of killing an officer of the police's intelligence wing in 1966.
All right, welcome back, Mr. Rehan. So, who do you think are the real players in the conflict of Kashmir?
I mean, everyone, India, Pakistan, even nowadays China, everyone, they are playing their own cards. But who are the real sufferers? I mean, who are paying the price is the Kashmiri people. I mean, there is a UN regulation in 1948 promised a plebiscite in Kashmir that and until now we don't have this kind of thing yet in Kashmir. I mean, the Kashmir, the geography of Kashmir, the culture of Kashmir, the resources of Kashmir, the tourism industry of Kashmir, everything belongs to the people of Kashmir. And be it India, be it New Delhi, be it Beijing, be it Islamabad, none should have any right to interfere in this domain. So Kashmiri people, their voice should be heard, and this promise of UN regulation that there should be a plebiscite in Kashmir. Why there is no plebiscite till now? I mean, you go there, you ask the people of the Kashmir, what is your choice? You want to stay with India, you want independence, and then not only the regional players, but the international community, it can be United Nations, they should sit down with all the parties and they should listen the voice of the Kashmiri people, and there should be some solution. But what we are seeing that the international community is not playing their role, what we expect from them, and that's why the Kashmiri people's voice has been since 1949 or 1947 it's still been unheard.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rehan, for being on our show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, viewers, social media has been riled up about this situation in Kashmir and the oppression that is going on. So let's take a look on how people have voiced their opinions, and then we can conclude the show.
At first, let's take a look at this beautiful picture of Kashmir shared by Omer Langate. On the other hand, Muhammad Habib ur Rahman condemns the act of being silent on the agony of Kashmiris. And at last, in this tweet, we face a fundamental question. Why is blood cheap deemed in Kashmir?
Alright viewers, that's it for today. To watch bits of our episodes or get more updates, you can follow us on our social media platforms. Our team works really hard to make sure that you enjoy the show. So let us know what you think. We'll meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.